Zach, we're back. It's week 15. We are looking at some moves to make. If your trade deadline may or may not have passed, we're doing a lot of if your trade deadline has passed, what are you doing now that the playoffs have started for other league mates? Maybe you're in the playoffs. Maybe you're not. Maybe you're on the outside looking in. Who knows? First and foremost, the first move to make, as always, like the video, comment down below what moves you're trying to make. If your trade deadline has passed or it hasn't, we definitely want to know what moves you're looking to get into. And if you want that much more help making those moves, check out our Patreon Discord, patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. Now doing 7-day free trials. Get in there, check it out, see how you feel about it. But with all that said, Zach, we're going to get right to the content that people came for. The first thing we're looking at, the Dynasty focus of the week. What are we looking to do this week from a strategic standpoint? Zach, I'm going to kick it to you here first. Where's your focus at this week, week 15, for you in Dynasty?
You know, we want to talk about other things to do besides trading, but I did want to address trading, right? If your league is still allowing trading, you want to make sure that a trade that comes across your inbox or one that you're sending out makes sense for you and makes sense for your trading partner. I got a couple of trades today. Obviously, this past week, we endured another rash of injuries, the biggest one being Justin Herbert, right? I had a league in which I'm non-competitive. I'm at the top of the draft order. I have 4 first-round picks already, including 101 and potentially 103. My quarterback situation is looking pretty good. Kyler Murray traded for Kirk Cousins, and I have Brock Purdy as well. Somebody offered me a trade. They were trying to get Kyler Murray for 2 late first-round picks. And I said to the owner, I said, listen, this guy only had 2 quarterbacks in a super flex league. I said, I understand this trade makes sense for you, but this doesn't make sense for me. I already have 4 first-round picks, and I feel pretty good about my quarterback situation moving forward. Why would I do this to then get 2 late first to now probably have to take a quarterback in the top 3 picks, right? Not saying that I'm not doing that, but I'm putting myself in the best situation in that league to take whoever I feel is best for my team in that spot. If I trade away Kyler Murray and I don't get a quarterback back, now I have another need. And what did I get back for that? 2 late first-round picks. And this works the other way too. If you're a team trading away, let's say like a Joe Flacco, you make sure you're offering Joe Flacco to a team that's in the playoffs right now. We want to make sure that we've talked about this before, where we're not just sending out trades to just send out trades. We're making sure that this trade benefits both parties as well. And you want to make sure that you're doing that, especially if you're a rebuilding team, because some of the best trades for rebuilding teams come in this part of the season if your leagues still allow it. I know that you're a big believer in this, Bob, because you are anti-trade deadline guy. And I know that a lot of leagues have had trade deadlines pass, but let's look at the landscape of your league now. If you're a rebuilding team, would it be good if your league had an extended trade deadline? This is something that I have not been a fan of, Bob, before I even met you. Like, I like trade deadlines, but I'm warming up to the idea of having them at least be week 14 and not having them at all. So if you do have a league, Bob, that doesn't have a trade deadline and allows you to make moves, make sure that you are making a move that doesn't throw away all the things you've done for the first 14 weeks. So I'm kind of really talking to the rebuilding teams here, Bob. But like I said, this could work both ways.
I think the one thing I want to add on of what, like, if you were to make that move to trade away one of your quarterbacks for later picks, not only do I not think it's awesome value, but I think what that really does, and you kind of touched on this, but not only does it take away, like, it kind of puts you in a box where you have to take a quarterback at 103 and probably 101. But what it also does is it just takes away the flexibility you have with that pick. Say you don't love the quarterback that falls to 103. Say you don't love the situation, whatever it is. Say somebody does love that quarterback and loves that quarterback enough to overpay for that pick. That takes all that off the table. You lose a lot of flexibility there. And that right alone for me would be such a thing that doesn't get factored into the value of the trade, because taking away flexibility with draft picks, that's a lot of why we have them. Because if you're not using them for other than just drafting players, you're making a mistake using your picks and not using them to the fullest of their ability. Now, moving on to my focus for this week, assuming trade deadlines have passed, it's really hard to improve your roster if your deadline is passed. It's just, fact of the matter is, all you can really do at this point is play the waiver wire. Even if you're competitive, obviously setting your best lineups, checking in on start sit videos, whatever it takes for you to set the best lineup possible. But play the waiver wire, see who's worth stashing for next season, who's worth cutting to get off my roster and get my team set up with some high upside opportunities that I'm stashing on my roster for next season, either by adding players who may end up in expanded roles next season. Say there's somebody in free agency ahead of them. they don't fill the need in the draft or in, any capacity with a priority free agent or anything like that, or also thinking about the opportunity you may have to flip these guys on hype. Maybe T. Higgins, for example, does leave in free agency. That leaves 2 rookie wide receivers right now in expanded roles that may or may not be filled in free agency or the draft. You might be able to flip those guys on some hype, or who knows, they might be lineup fixtures for you down the road. But either way, for me, I'm looking to unclog my roster, get some high upside players on it. Far too often, we just get stuck with players we can easily replace. Mike's made great points about this lately, is if you can find somebody else that can do exactly what this player is, and I promise you, looking at roster percentages on Sleeper, looking at players that are rostered in over 50% of leagues, and I know that includes, all dynasty leagues and all leagues on Sleeper. If a player doesn't have the upside to be more than bench depth, it's okay to turn them in for someone who has the opportunity to be as much as that or possibly even more. Set yourself up with options that could end up being harder to replace than just going and grabbing somebody off the waiver wire. So this goes back to a point I've touched on over the past few weeks here and there of just roster efficiency, kind of taking the time to who belongs, who doesn't. Let's get some upside on this roster that can actually, take the upside swing cheaply, as opposed to, having to spend a high first round pick on a player who may or may not pan out. And I'm not saying that obviously these guys probably don't have the same level of upside as a first round rookie pick, but these are a heck of a lot cheaper, and there's little to no risk in adding these guys. That's kind of what we're talking about a lot today. We got a lot of stashes we're adding today. We got a lot of players we're looking to cut today. So with that said, Zach, I'm going to kick it off with my bit here, my next point here, talking about some players I want to cut and get the heck off my roster sooner rather than later, because I think at this point, they're just clogging rosters. So first players I'm looking to cut and get off of my roster. Number 1 being Dawson Knox, tight end out of Buffalo. Devontae Parker, wide receiver out of New England. And good old former Packer, current Chief, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, both of which those 2 wide receivers are at 50% roster percentage. And in case I missed it, Dawson Knox, 71% rostered across sleeper leagues right now. And in turn, with cutting those guys, I'm looking to stash my boy Earlyyyy, a guy who did not get a lot of hype coming into the draft process. Struggled at the combine, was not great, not very high on a lot of people's boards. So why do I want to cut these guys, Zach? First off, Dawson Knox isn't even the best tight end on his own team at this point when it comes to fantasy. Easy enough there. With Devontae Parker, you're chasing a wide receiver 1 finish from 5 years ago that took him 4 years to even get. Marquez Valdes-Scantling's best career finish in PPR was wide receiver 53. And for some reason, people still want these guys on their rosters. And my thought is literally anyone you're drafting in the 5th round of this upcoming rookie draft has more upside than these guys, because we know what these guys are. We know that they're roster cloggers at this point. Get them the heck off your rosters. And you may ask the question, I did it this season with our Rewinders League. I cut a bunch of players because, and I didn't even fill my roster back up with them. And, not necessarily to the level of these guys, but I cut a bunch of players out of my roster because I was having such a time sorting through the garbage to find starting talent. It was there. There's starting players there, but I'm just having to they're hiding in the midst of all the trash, and it was making it harder to set my lineups effectively. So, you may ask yourself the question of, I know if I cut this guy, somebody else is going to go pick him up. Good. He's their problem now. Or maybe what if I need a spot start? What if I'm, injured, and whatever the case is? In most dynasty leagues, you will be able to find replaceable talent on waivers. Unless you're in 40-man, like we are in the Rewinders versus Patron League, you can find replaceable starting depth in quotes, guys that can, do what these guys are doing. And ultimately, these guys are just the epitome of being a roster clogger, that being Dawson Knox, Devontae Parker, and Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Get them off your roster. Go at Earlyyyy, because the uncertainty with Saquon this offseason and the running back landscape in general, he's another running back who, hey, I like this college profile. I'm not going to lie. I like this college tape. Thought he was plenty shifty. I thought he was fast enough. And one of the biggest attractors for me, he can catch the ball. As I kind of mentioned, his combine didn't go as planned, and obviously his draft capital wasn't great either. But with the running back landscape the way it is, it's hard to rule out anyone at this point getting some opportunity with how quickly a backfield can go to heck. And, I asked last week, or you asked last week, if, I thought of anybody that could be next year's Kyron Williams. Eric Gray is it.
Oh yeah.
Similar draft capital, similar skill set. Finds himself in a backfield. If they don't bring Saquon back, maybe they draft somebody, maybe they don't. You can't assume teams are going to draft a running back anymore because nobody cares about running backs. Why spend the draft capital on them? And, you know, I'm not saying that go spend a first round pick to go get this guy, but I kicked around some of my leagues. He was available in 3 of my leagues, and he's not anymore because I just went and picked him up. But just one of those things. Kick the tires, see what's out there. He's a guy you can put on your taxi squad heading into the offseason. You can't put him on there until the season's over, obviously, but this is a guy I want to go get. Zach, any thoughts on Eric Gray or any of these guys I'm cutting? Are you holding on to hope for any of these guys still? Are you giving them the boot as well?
Yeah, the way I do this exercise, Bob, is I go to like the 2022 rookie draft, right? And I go to the 3rd and 4th rounds. And I just picked a random league of mine. It's a super flex league, 12 team. I think it's start 10, start 9. I just went to the 3rd round. This is the 2022 draft, okay? Kyron Williams was the 311. The 4-2 was Romeo Dobbs. The 4-4 was Jake Ferguson. The 4-11 was Jerome Ford. So that's what I'm doing is I'm going to now my 2023 rookie drafts, and I'm going into the 3rd and 4th round. And I'm saying to myself, who is potentially moving up into an opportunity, just like you presented, Bob, an Eric Gray type situation. Nothing is guaranteed. We don't know. We are just taking our best guesses at who is potentially moving up into an opportunity, into a role in their offense because another opportunity is being vacated. That's what Kyron Williams is. That's what Jerome Ford is. That's what Romeo Dobbs is. That's what, who else did I bring? Jake Ferguson is. Jake Ferguson had, 46 fantasy points in his rookie year, and now he's on pace in this league for 163. So I think this is a 1 point per reception league for tight ends. These are just examples. So some of the examples that I looked at stashing myself were Deuce Vaughn. I have no idea what's going to happen there. Rico Dowdle, free agent. Tony Pollard, free agent. Deuce Vaughn is in that system. I don't see the Cowboys spending a lot of money at the running back position. We know where they're at with Dak, with CeeDee. They're going to be looking at some other contract extensions. Obviously, that offense, a lot of guys on that offensive line want to get paid. They're having some superstars emerge on the defensive end of the ball as well. So will they need Deuce Vaughn? I don't know, but it's a good opportunity if he does move into a role in that offense next year. How about Xavier Hutchinson? Is Robert Woods going to be there next year? Xavier Hutchinson, funny enough, I know this is a terrible stat because they looked so bad on Sunday, was the leading wide receiver on Sunday. So, and that's a stupid stat because I think he had 2 receptions. That's how terrible it was. Yeah, but you get my point. Is there was an opportunity and Xavier Hutchinson got a little bit more run. How does that look next year? A guy that we talked about last week, I really like again, Parker Washington. I don't know if an opportunity emerges in that offense for him, but he's looked so good in the little sample size that we've seen thus far that it's going to be hard for Jacksonville if he continues to grow in this offense to keep him off the field. And he's made some dynamic catches for that offense 2 weeks in a row. He's made a spectacular play. A week ago was the touchdown that kept him in that game. So he's rostered in 72% of leagues. This is a player I'm looking at trying to acquire. You know, is he a free agent? Is he available? Is there some kind of small trade I can make in the offseason? So on and so forth. Another guy is Trey Palmer. I know that this channel has talked about Trey Palmer quite a bit. We don't know where that Bucs offense is next year with Chris Godwin. Mike Evans is a potential free agent. So Trey Palmer looks to have an opportunity in that offense and has been a part of the offense already as a rookie. And then probably my favorite stash is Chris Rodriguez Jr., somebody I've been stashing in a lot of my leagues now just because I look at that backfield and I say, I don't think Antonio Gibson's going to be there next year. I don't know what that franchise looks like next year. Who's the coach? Who's the quarterback? But Chris Rodriguez there on a rookie contract, a nice backup running back to Brian Robinson. I don't think it'll cost you a lot to acquire. He is only rostered in 53% of leagues. So again, Bob, I'm doing this practice where I open up my league's rookie draft, and whatever the last 2-3 rounds are, depending on how many rounds your rookie draft is, I'm looking at those players and saying who is potentially moving into a new opportunity next year in order to stash them on my rosters for next year.
I like a lot of these guys. I like Deuce Vaughn a lot. Another guy who was, electric as a college player, but the size was his biggest knock. Checked out in pretty much every other athletic metric, definitely checked out in production metrics, but just a small dude. And the NFL, if it is turning away from, oh, you have to be this big dude, you have to be this big hulking player to play running back, to play wide receiver, etc. I'm not saying it's going to be all 5'8", 175-pound dudes out there playing running back or anything like that. But, Deuce Vaughn is absolutely talented. Hey, if you're talented, you're going to get the ball. Already has been featured somewhat on special teams, kick returns, punt returns, somewhat, and so forth. But Parker Washington, another guy who, as a prospect, Nate and I both agreed this was like the great, just safe player, reliable, great catcher of the ball, somewhat athletic and decent enough after the catch that he could be solid if he ever got a role in an offense. Trey Palmer, not a guy who I was terribly in on as a prospect, but hey, he's been involved. And right now, with so much uncertainty in front of him, you can't ask for much more than that. Xavier Hutchinson liked him as well. Obviously, didn't get great draft capital. Chris Rodriguez was never real in on, but has shown flashes in, behind Brian Robinson, and could be one of those handcuffs next year that we're talking about needing to add because Brian Robinson is hurt. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised. So I like these a lot. Go grab them if they're available for sure. Try to kick some trade offers around if you have to get these guys cheap. I don't think any of them is expensive. Parker Washington, maybe just because he's getting, quote unquote starting reps now and he's quote unquote featured in the offense. But the second the season is over, nobody's going to care about him. You might see him hit waivers because, it's the Christian Kirk show again. So definitely keep an eye out for those guys. And man, this is tough. A guy who, we've shed a lot of hate on this channel for. He's caught a lot of strays. Talking about somebody I'm getting rid of, I'm looking to cut. And I will say before I even say his name, he is somebody you should try to get something for because at one point he was so highly regarded, quote unquote. A lot of quoties today, but I'm looking to cut Kadarius Toney, who is currently 79% rostered across sleeper leagues, and DJ Chark, 73% rostered. And I'm looking to stash instead Charlie Jones or Andre Yoshevich. Charlie Jones, respectively, 39% rostered. Andre Yoshevich, 24% rostered. And a name that I can almost promise is going to be out on waivers despite this high rostership that I was surprised with. Xavier Gipson, wide receiver for the New York Jets, has been getting some sneaky run out there, but we'll talk about that in a minute. First, I want to get into why I'm moving on from some of these guys. Kadarius Toney has proven time and time and time again that he's just not that guy. This offense has had so many opportunities available to wide receivers, and Rashee Rice is looking more and more like the guy who's going to be at least the one there for now. Somebody could obviously come in, and like I said, you should absolutely still look to get something for him. But as I said before, I have more faith in the rookies coming out next year in the later rounds, 4th, 5th, 3rd rounds. If I get a 3rd for Kadarius Toney, I'm taking it and I'm running for the hills and I'm hunkering down because I just got away with robbery at that point. There comes a time to move on, and that time has been now. It's been for a minute, but get him off your roster while you still can. DJ Chark, a guy who boasts a similar story to that of Devontae Parker, like I mentioned before. One good season, people are clamoring onto that, holding out hope for more, but situation just not getting any better. He's not that great of a player, just another roster clogger in need of a boot, if you ask me. And, same discussion we had before. If you're worried about losing bench depth, quote unquote, quoties, at the level of these players, find better players. I'm sorry. I don't want to be in a position where I'm relying on any of these guys to have to start games for me. And maybe you're holding out, hope having them on your roster that you can get them for something. At some point, you're preventing yourself from adding players who could actually do something for your roster, because there's Kadarius Toney's right now, DJ Chark's, dime a dozen. You can go find these guys, especially in leagues that aren't especially deep. Obviously, most leagues are not that deep. I'd much rather go just swap these guys out, re-roll on some younger talent, and just go from there. But like I said, I don't want to rely on these guys. These guys belong on waivers to be grabbed in times of desperation when you just literally have nobody. It's bye weeks, it's injuries, whatever the case is. These are not to be held long term. Like I said, I don't want to prevent acquiring better players because I'm holding on to these schmucks, like, from the previous point as well, when I could be adding Charlie Jones, Andre Yoshevich, Xavier Gipson, who I can flip for draft capital later, or all these quarterbacks that have popped up this season. Zach, we've seen trades for Jake Browning, we've seen trades for CJ Beathard, we've seen trades for all of these guys that tip to your cap. You said to go load up on backup quarterbacks because here we are again. It's coming down to the crunch time of the season, and we're relying on guys who aren't top 8 picks in startups. Go open up room for that. Don't be worrying about holding on to these losers. Go get yourself some of that, Zach. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know you wanted to get in some for this one. I'll leave the floor open to you.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that I said to get backup quarterbacks in the preseason.
Yeah, in August. I know.
Not recently, because this happened last year. It's happened way worse this year than I could have ever anticipated. Yeah. But yeah, it's happened again. Just to your Kadarius Toney point, and it might be too late because of what transpired over the weekend. You've got reports where the Chiefs are now saying, hey, look, we're not going to give up on Kadarius Toney, which is like an insane thing to say. But and forgive me if I'm referencing something you already did, but we had a discussion, you and I collectively, with somebody in our Discord that was talking about moving off Kadarius Toney, and you and I were like, dude, move off of him now. This was last week. This was before the incident against the Bills. Because there's one thing when a player dies on your roster because they just, as a NFL player, their time is running out in the league, like a Tom Brady. That's one thing, because you got use out of that. You can't even start Kadarius Toney now. You haven't been able to start Kadarius Toney for the better part of a year, almost a year and a half. And I just, if it's not going to happen now on this team with this quarterback, with this coach, when is it ever going to happen? The more time that you allow Kadarius Toney to be on your roster, you are losing value by the week. I don't even think, and I think the person in our Discord ended up trading Kadarius Toney. I think it was for Charlie Jones, right? Was that the trade?
I believe so. I'm fuzzy on it, but I think that might have been it.
Can you even get that done now? After this week? Can you get that done after the bleep show that was Kadarius Toney this past Sunday? I just don't think that there's just going to be this career renaissance for Kadarius Toney, because he's had every opportunity to just contribute to this offense, and he can't do that. And you look at his snap percentage, it's terrible on a team that is so desperate for wide receiver help. So if you can get anything at this point for Kadarius Toney, any of the players that we mentioned, find a Chiefs fan, find a University of Florida fan, find somebody who has a reason to want Kadarius Toney, because there is no other reason. There's no on-field production. Nobody believes in the prospect that Kadarius Toney was anymore. And I think if you wait, you're not going to be able to move Kadarius Toney. You may be able to throw him in as a add-on to a trade, but I think you are talking about a value that could literally die on your roster if you don't move him. And that's why I really wanted to get in on this topic of conversation here, Bob.
Like you said, the career renaissance that could or could not happen that people are waiting out for. What are the odds it sticks? That's the thing too. Like, could he have one good year? Great. Happen on somebody else's roster. I'll take what I can get for him now. The only justification to holding him is if, and I don't even want to open myself up to this, but the only justification for holding him would be to try to improve a pick in your draft by a handful of picks or something like that. And maybe you're moving a third with Kadarius to get into the second round kind of a thing. And you're not moving probably a full round doing that, but get Kadarius Toney off your roster one way or another. I hate losing value just by cutting somebody, but I am very close to that point. Get away from him, get him off your roster. But I want to talk about these stashes. We've talked about Charlie Jones and Andrei Yoshevich a little bit. With T. Higgins situation up in the air, Tyler Boyd situation also up in the air with free agency this coming season. Charlie Jones, Andrei Yoshevich just kind of look to step in. And Bengals could use some cheap help at this point. They're going to need to pay Jamar Chase soon. They just paid Joe Burrow. They're going to need to, add some help here and there. Obviously, they're going to need to pay some rookies, or not some rookies. They're going to have to pay some defensive players too, rookies eventually. But, I would not, rule out them not bringing in help for at least one of these guys. I don't necessarily believe that they bring in two players if they don't re-sign T. Higgins. But either way, love Charlie Jones' game. If you haven't watched him enough or at all, go watch his film from Purdue. Great final season, great statistics. And then Xavier Gibson, like I said, somebody who I was surprised to see him rostered in more leagues than Andre Yoshevich, and that could be because Gibson's been getting a little bit of run lately, scoring a touchdown this past weekend, getting involved in the offense, racking up a good bit of yards and receptions the previous week. But a guy, that's it. He's getting involved in the offense. This offense doesn't have a lot of other options. The other options are Aaron Rodgers bandwagoners and Allen Lazard and Randall Cobb, who are shells of themselves without Aaron Rodgers to feed them the ball constantly in Zach Wilson's new offense, and feed them the ball maybe when they shouldn't be fed the ball in general because maybe they're not that good anymore. But, I want to get these guys on my roster. Xavier Gibson, another guy, he's a playmaker, and he's gotten the ball in the offense in different ways, not just your typical route runner. He's getting handoffs, he's getting jet sweeps, things like that. And they want to get him the ball. They're putting him out there as a punt returner and a kick returner. These are things you want to do with explosive players. And explosive players who do well on special teams sometimes get upgraded at the offense. We've seen that over the course of the season. Hey, take your shot. You could do worse. There's worse people out there. You could, choose to roster Kadarius Toney.
My last point here, Bob, is we've talked a good amount of, if your leagues allow trading, great, stashing, cutting. But the other part of this is your draft order. Yes, I'm more so talking to the teams that are already out of it at this point. Your leagues, what I do in my commissioner leagues is after the games are finished in week 14, I put out an announcement of who the 101 through the 106 are in case I made a mistake. Somebody else can correct me, but I will have that to refer to at the end of the season when I'm setting the draft order after the championships. So I'm looking at where I am in the draft order now, and I'm looking at where everyone else is in the draft order. What needs do those teams have that they might address in the draft? And I'm starting to have these conversations now. Because again, we talk about the teams that are not in competition for a championship. What do they have to do? Well, this is why I love Dynasty, because for me, Dynasty never ends. Okay, if you're a non-competing team, this is what you should be doing. Where do I fit into the draft order, and what do the other teams look like they're going to need? Do they need a wide receiver? Do they need a quarterback? I mentioned earlier that league that I have 101 and 103. I'd like to get a quarterback, and I'd like to get Marvin Harrison Jr. So should I draft Marvin Harrison Jr. at 101 and then take whichever quarterback falls to me at 103? We need to start having these conversations. We have a strategy channel in our Discord. We have an area where we can toss these ideas out and see what other people think. Now, look, there's a long way to go. There's a whole process that has yet to play out. The NFL Combine, of course, the NFL Draft, landing spots, so on and so forth. But let's start getting prepared now. Let's start seeing, I'm a big proponent of using my draft picks to not only draft rookies, but to make trades. What players am I potentially targeting in the offseason? Hint, it should be someone locked into it should be someone who has guaranteed job security. Definitely shouldn't be a free agent because you don't really know where they're going. These are the conversations that should be happening with teams that are out of it, between themselves, between their fellow league mates who are also out of it, just to kind of see where things are falling right now in terms of your league mates and your own draft order.
Love this point, Zach. And we can do a whole video on this, and we probably will do several over the course of the offseason. But I think, even if you're a playoff team, you have to keep in mind that some teams have picks that are not theirs in the top 6. You might be a playoff team who has a top 6 pick or a non-playoff team's pick. You belong in those conversations just as much as the next guy. You might be trying to focus on setting your starting lineup, but take a minute, get in those conversations when they're started, be the first guy in the door, be the one to talk about it. But I think touching on another point you had, finding holes in the draft board where maybe this team at the 104 really needs a wide receiver, but it doesn't make a lot of sense there. And that's just an example for right now. I'm not saying that's how the draft board is when the time comes, but they really need a wide receiver. Wide receiver is looking more like a 107, 108 pick. Maybe that's where you are. Maybe 104 makes more sense for quarterback. Maybe you can convince them to kind of slide back by helping them out at wide receiver where you have more depth. You get to move up from that 107, 108 pick to the 104. You get to take a quarterback. That's just one example of how you can kind of manipulate the draft board. And kind of the best thing I can do when you're drafting is turn every single pick into either a draft for need that makes sense where it's being drafted. So say you need quarterback, be drafting a quarterback on the board where it makes sense. If it's running back, if it's tight end, if it's wide receiver, whatever the case is, don't be reaching down the board to go get the next best running back when you shouldn't be drafting them until the second round, is basically the thought process there. Another option, trading that pick, taking that pick, trading it for another option. Hopefully most rookie drafts are after the NFL draft, so you know what running backs might be in, dodgy situations like we had with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet last year. Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, that didn't end up being anything. Zach Charbonnet has been for a bit of a thorn in the side of Kenneth Walker, although he's been banged up, so it's tough to say what the share really is. Just a couple things you can do to start having those draft conversations, start planning the draft. The sooner you're thinking about it and getting kind of in that mindset of, like you touched on, having the strategy, where to make picks, where to pass on this for that, where you can get it later, kind of a thing. All these things we're going to be having a lot of discussions about over the course of the offseason. And I hope that you guys decide to stick around with us. Hit that subscribe button down below. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Leave a comment what you're looking to do down the stretch here. Week 15 playoffs have most likely begun in your leagues. If you're out, what are you looking to do in your leagues? If you are in the playoffs, hey, congrats to you. Shout out. Hope you win it. Unless you're facing me. Just kidding. I wish you the best all the same. I do have to mention again, of course, getting in on the patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind Discord server. Free 7-day trial. Check it out. See if you like it. Get it on the Discord itself or the Discord and the bonus podcast we have kicking around as well. But with all that said, that's going to be it for me and Zach today. We'll see you in the next one. But until then, I hope that y'all have a good one.